A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine waking up in a Middle East where flipping between Hebrew, Arabic, and Farsi is as mundane as a commuter in Brussels switching between French, Dutch, and German. It sounds like a fever dream or a high-concept sci-fi novel, doesn't it? But in a region where the literal air is heavy with history and conflict, the words we use or don't use are often the very first and very last barriers to any kind of shared future. Think about the psychological shift that happens when the other is no longer a muffled voice behind a concrete wall or a translated snippet on a news crawl, but a person whose jokes you can actually understand in the original.
It's a powerful image, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I've been diving into the data on this all week because Daniel's prompt today really hits on a linguistic paradox. He's asking us about language as a bridge versus a barrier in the Israeli-Palestinian context and the broader Middle East. We're going to look at why fluency sometimes breeds suspicion instead of trust, the movements trying to flip that script, and what a truly trilingual region might actually look like. By the way, quick shout out to Google Gemini 1.5, Flash for powering our script today. It's funny you mentioned Brussels Corn, because in Belgium, while the languages are official, there's still a lot of linguistic territorialism. But in the Middle East, that territorialism isn't just about street signs, it's about survival.
I love that Daniel brought this up. It's one of those things that feels obvious on the surface. Oh, if we just talk to each other, things get better. But the reality on the ground is so much thornier. You have this tiny fraction of Jewish Israelis who actually speak Arabic fluently, and conversely, a very specific subset of Palestinians or regional neighbors who speak Hebrew. And as Daniel points out, the reasons why someone learns the other's language can actually make the situation more tense. If you learn a language to trade, that's one thing. If you learn it to interrogate, that's a completely different energy you're bringing to the conversation. It's the difference between opening a door and picking a lock.
The statistics are actually quite staggering when you look at the disconnect. About 20% of Israel's population are Arab citizens who are native Arabic speakers, yet among the Jewish Israeli population, only about 8 to 10% can really carry on a conversation in Arabic. And even that 10% is skewed toward older generations, the Mizrahi Jews who immigrated from Arab countries like Morocco, Iraq, or Yemen. For them, Arabic wasn't a foreign language, it was the language of their grandmother's kitchen. But as that generation passes, that organic connection is fading, replaced by formal, often academic or military-focused instruction.
And that's a huge distinction, right? There's kitchen Arabic, and then there's intelligence Arabic. On the flip side, unless you're working in East Jerusalem, involved in specific cross-border business, or unfortunately spending time in the prison system, the number of Palestinians or Lebanese or Egyptians who speak modern Hebrew is remarkably low. It's often a one-way street of linguistic necessity, rather than mutual curiosity.
Let's pause on that prison system point for a second, because that's a grim but real example of how language is acquired. You have high-ranking Palestinian figures who learned fluent academic Hebrew while serving time in Israeli prisons. They didn't just learn to bark orders. They read the Israeli newspapers. They watched the nightly news. They studied the political landscape. When they speak Hebrew now, it's not because they wanted to build a bridge, in the sense of a friendship. It was a strategic necessity to understand the opponent. They can dissect an Israeli cabinet debate better than many Israelis because they've studied the rhetoric as a survival mechanism.
It's knowing the other as a form of tactical intelligence. And that leads us straight into what Daniel called the suspicion gap. If I'm a Palestinian in the West Bank and a Jewish Israeli walks up to me speaking fluent local dialect Arabic, my first thought probably isn't, Oh, what a lovely bridge builder. My first thought is more likely. Is this Shin Bet? Is this an undercover soldier? Because for decades, the most fluent Arabic speakers in the Jewish community were often found in the seamist RMP units, undercover units that blend into Arab populations.
The Fada effect, if you've seen the Netflix show. When the most visible example of a Hebrew speaker using Arabic is someone infiltrating a neighborhood, the language itself becomes a red flag. It's a tragedy of associations. You've taken a beautiful, ancient language and turned it into a camouflage pattern.
But wait, how does that work in practice? If I'm a well-meaning Israeli activist and I go to a village to help with an olive harvest, and I start speaking Arabic, am I actually making people more nervous? Is there a point where being too good at the language actually backfires?
In many cases, yes, at least initially. There's an uncanny valley of linguistic proficiency. If you speak a little bit of broken Arabic, it's clearly the effort of a foreigner or an outsider. It's non-threatening, it's almost endearing because you're struggling. But when you hit that level of near-native fluency, when you get the cane and the quaff sounds just right, the brain starts looking for the motive. Why did this person put in the thousands of hours required to lose their accent? In a high conflict zone, the answer is rarely because I like the poetry. The assumption is that you're being paid by the state to sound that way.
It's the ultimate irony. The people who might be the most pro-peace or ideologically driven to learn Arabic specifically for dialogue are the ones who get caught in the fire of this suspicion. They spend years mastering the nuances of a dialect to show respect, only to find that their proficiency triggers a defensive reflex. It's like trying to pet a stray dog, but you're wearing a veterinarian's uniform. The dog doesn't know you want to help, it just remembers the last guy in that outfit gave it a shot.
That's a great analogy. And it's not just one way. Think about the IDF's Hadar program. It was established around the year 2000, and it's an incredibly intensive, immersive Arabic training course for intelligence and field operations. They don't just teach the words, they teach the mentality. They watch Arab soap operas, they listen to popular music, they learn the specific slang of Gaza versus Nablus. When the primary institution teaching you the language of the neighbor is the military, the language itself becomes a tool of statecraft and security. It's security Arabic, not civilian Arabic.
So, Herman, let's dig into that Hadar program for a second. If I'm a graduate of that, I'm not just learning how to ask for directions. I'm learning cultural nuances, slang, even how to blend in. That's a very high level of cognitive labor. Does that ever translate back into empathy once these guys take the uniform off? Or does the intelligence framing stick forever? Does a 22-year-old who spent 3 years listening to wiretaps suddenly start seeing the humanity in those voices once they're back in civilian life?
It's a complicated transition. There are certainly cases where former intelligence officers become advocates for peace because they've gained a deep, albeit specialized, understanding of the other side. They've heard the mothers talking to their children. They've heard the mundane struggles of people trying to get through a day. You can't listen to 1,000 hours of people's private lives without realizing they're human. But for the community they were studying, that history is hard to erase. There's a psychological concept called linguistic profiling. When the out-group masters the in-group's language too well, it can actually feel like an invasion of privacy or a deceptive tactic. It's why some peace activists who are truly fluent find themselves in this weird social isolation. They're too Arabic for some Israeli circles and too Israeli for the Arab circles. They become linguistic orphans.
It's like being a spy for a country that doesn't exist yet. You've got the tools for the bridge, but nobody wants to walk on it because they think it's rigged with explosives. But let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Is there actually proof that speaking the language helps? Or is it just a nice sentiment that falls apart under the weight of real-world geopolitics? I mean, if two people are arguing over a piece of land, does it matter if they're arguing in the same language or through a translator? The land is still the land. The borders are still the borders.
It actually matters more than you'd think, especially in the framing of the conflict. There is some fascinating research on this. A study in the Journal of Conflict Resolution found that peace proposals are perceived much more favorably when they're delivered in the recipient's native language rather than a neutral, third language like English. English acts as a sterile crutch. It's safe, it's professional, but it lacks emotional resonance. When you speak someone's native tongue, you're signaling a willingness to inhabit their world. You're lowering your own defenses by making the effort to learn theirs. You're essentially saying, I am willing to meet you on your terms, in your home.
That makes sense. It's the difference between a business meeting and a heart-to-heart. When you use a third language like English, you're both meeting in a no man's land of culture. It's a sanitized space where neither side has the home field advantage. But when you step into their language, you're a guest in their house. But then you have the 2018 nation state law in Israel, which downgraded Arabic from an official language to one with special status. That feels like the opposite of building a guest room. It's more like putting up a members-only sign on the linguistic landscape.
That move was widely criticized for exactly that reason. Even from a purely pragmatic security standpoint, many former heads of the Shin Bet and Mossad argued against it. They understood that by demoting the language, you're alienating the very people you need to integrate. It sent a symbolic message that the language, and by extension, the culture and people behind it, is not central to the state's identity. When you legally demote a language, you're telling its native speakers that their primary mode of expression is secondary in the eyes of the law. It reinforces the idea that the two languages aren't coexisting, they're competing for space on the same signs. It turns a shared geography into a zero-sum game of phonetics.
Let's talk about those signs for a minute, because they're such a visible battleground. Have you ever noticed how the transliterations on Israeli road signs sometimes Hebraize the Arabic names? Like, instead of using the historic Arabic name for a village, they'll use the Hebrew name but written in Arabic script. So the Arabic speaker sees the letters of their alphabet, but the word itself is the conqueror's name for the place. That's a subtle but massive form of linguistic erasure. It's like if you went to New York and all the signs said New Amsterdam, but written in English letters. It tells you who owns the map, even if they're letting you read it.
It's cartographic linguistics. It's an assertion of sovereignty through vowels. If I can't see my own name for my home on the map, I don't feel like I belong in the state. Okay, so if the top-down approach is basically my language is better than yours, what's happening on the ground? Daniel mentioned person-to-person diplomacy. I know there are groups like Parent Circle, Families Forum, where people who have lost family members to the conflict actually sit down together. How does language play into that? Do they just speak English and hope for the best? Or is there a deeper linguistic exchange happening?
In those circles, language is often the first offering. It's the first olive branch. You'll see a Jewish mother learn how to say, I share your pain, in Arabic, and a Palestinian father learn the Hebrew word for reconciliation, piyas. It's not about fluency, it's about the efforts. The brokenness of the language actually becomes a sign of sincerity. It says, I am willing to look foolish and struggle with my words just to reach you. If I speak perfect English, I'm showing off my education. If I speak broken Arabic, I'm showing you my heart.
That's a beautiful point. The stumble is the bridge. It's the vulnerability of not being perfectly articulate that builds the trust. Take the hand-in-hand schools, or Yad B'Yad. They teach children in both Hebrew and Arabic from day one. These kids grow up not just bilingual, but biconceptual. They understand that there are two names for every street, two histories for every hill. When you learn both languages simultaneously, you don't have to overcome the suspicion of the other side because the other was your desk mate in second grade. You don't ask, why does he speak my language? Because he's always spoken it. It's just part of the atmosphere.
But that's the long game, though. That takes a generation to bear fruit. What about the adults? I've heard of this group, Madrasa. They aren't a school in the traditional sense, right? They're more of a movement? How do they handle the intelligence stigma we talked about?
Madrasa is actually a brilliant example of a grassroots shift. It's an Israeli social enterprise that teaches communicative Arabic, essentially spoken, everyday Arabic, to tens of thousands of Jewish Israelis via free online courses and community meetups. Their whole philosophy is that Arabic is a tool for neighborhood living. They want to strip away the intelligence officer stigma and replace it with the good neighbor reality. They're trying to create a civilian Arabic that can compete with the security Arabic of the past. They focus on things like how to order coffee, how to complain about the weather, or how to talk about your kids. It's about the mundane because the mundane is where peace actually lives.
That's a massive undertaking. It's basically trying to rebrand an entire language in the middle of a conflict zone. It's like trying to teach people that a hammer is for building houses when they've only ever seen it used to break windows. It reminds me of those Roots or Shorashim initiatives in the West Bank, where you have settlers and Palestinians living right next to each other, often in total silence, finally deciding to talk. If they start with language, does the political stuff follow, or do they just end up arguing more fluently? Because let's be honest, knowing a language doesn't make you agree with someone's politics.
Well, the arguing more fluently part is actually a massive improvement. If you can argue the specifics of a land deed or a water right in the other person's language, you've already narrowed the gap. You've removed the middleman. The goal of Roots isn't necessarily to reach a grand political agreement. It's to acknowledge the other's connection to the land. Language is the first step in that acknowledgement. If I call the land Al-Quds and you call it Yerushalayim, and we both understand why the other uses that word, we've moved past the "you're just a squatter" or "you're just an interloper" phase. We've entered a phase of mutual recognition. It's what linguists call humanizing the lexicon.
Humanizing the lexicon. I like that. It's about realizing that Zionism or Nakba aren't just political labels or weapons, but words that carry the weight of a person's entire identity and trauma. But let's get to the big idea, Daniel posed, a trilingual Middle East, Arabic, Hebrew, and Farsi. That is a heavy trio. Farsi is the one we haven't touched on much. That feels like the final boss of regional languages right now, given the tensions between Israel and Iran. Is there any world where Farsi becomes part of a regional bridge? It feels so distant compared to the daily friction of Hebrew and Arabic.
Farsi is fascinating because, unlike the Arabic-Hebrew dynamic where there's a lot of physical proximity and friction, the Farsi-Hebrew exchange is almost entirely digital or in the diaspora. But historically, these languages have deep roots together. Farsi is an Indo-European language, but it's written in an Arabic script and has tons of loanwords. Hebrew and Arabic are both Semitic. The linguistic bridge is actually already built into the grammar and history. The political barrier is what's blocking the traffic. There was a time, before 1979, when Tehran and Tel Aviv were incredibly close. There are still older generations in both places who remember that cultural exchange, who remember the flights between the two cities.
So, if we had a trilingual Belgium model in the Middle East, how does that actually change the nature of the conflict? Does it just make the propaganda more effective, because everyone can read the other side's tweets and find new things to be offended by? Or does it actually break the cycle? I mean, look at Twitter. People speak the same language there, and they still want to tear each other's heads off. Does fluency actually lead to peace, or just more efficient shouting?
It's a double-edged sword, but history suggests that routine multilingualism leads to economic and social integration. Look at Switzerland. They have 4 national languages. They have plenty of internal tensions, linguistic rivalries, and cultural differences, but those tensions are resolved in parliament or through trade, not through artillery. When you can read the other side's newspapers, watch their movies, and understand their jokes without a translator, the monolith of the enemy starts to crack. You see the internal debates. You realize that the Iranians or the Israelis aren't a single hive mind. You see the fringe groups versus the mainstream. You stop seeing a side and start seeing a society.
It's the demonopolization of information. Right now, if you're a Hebrew speaker who doesn't know Arabic, you're at the mercy of whatever your news outlet decides to translate for you. And usually they're translating the most inflammatory stuff, because that's what gets clicks. Look at what this radical said. If you can read the original source, you might realize that the scary statement was actually a heated debate in a local council about trash collection that got blown out of proportion. You see the mundane, and the mundane is the enemy of the monster narrative. It's hard to stay terrified of someone when you can see them arguing about parking tickets.
And think about the TikTok diplomacy we're seeing now. You have young Iranians and young Israelis using English to bypass state censors and talk about music or fashion. If they had a shared language, if that Israeli kid knew Farsi, or that Iranian kid knew Hebrew, the digital coexistence would be 10 times deeper. It's hard to drop a bomb on a city where you know the names of the coffee shops and the slang the kids use at the skate park. There was a viral campaign a few years ago, Israel Loves Iran and Iran Loves Israel, where people posted photos of themselves. It was beautiful, but it was largely in English. Imagine the impact if those messages were in the native tongue of the enemy. It transforms a slogan into a conversation.
It's the small world effect. But let's be realistic. Learning a language is hard. I'm a sloth, Herman. I move slowly. Learning a whole new alphabet and grammar system while someone is literally shooting at your neighborhood feels like a big ask. Is this just a romantic ideal for the elites? The people who have the time to sit in a cafe and study verbs? What about the guy working 2 jobs who just wants the sirens to stop? How do you make language learning a priority when survival is the only thing on the menu?
That's the biggest hurdle. Language learning requires cognitive surplus. You need the time, the safety, and the mental energy to do it. When you're in survival mode, you don't care about the subjunctive mood in Arabic or the causative verbs in Hebrew. You care about bread and water. That's why these grassroots movements are so vital. They're trying to make it accessible, communal, and, dare I say, fun. They're trying to show that the cost of not knowing the language is actually higher than the effort of learning it. The cost is more war, more misunderstanding, and more isolation. They're trying to turn language into a survival skill for peace rather than just a hobby for the wealthy. It's about building the infrastructure of the mind.
It's like an investment in social infrastructure. If we spend half as much on language programs as we do on missile defense, the Iron Dome might eventually be made of words. Okay, that was a bit cheesy, even for me. But you get the point. If you can talk your way out of a conflict, you don't need to shoot your way out. But how do you incentivize that? How do you make a teenager in Gaza want to learn Hebrew, or a teenager in Tel Aviv want to learn Arabic, without it feeling like betraying their people? In a high conflict zone, adopting the other's language can look like cultural surrender.
You have to tie it to opportunity. You have to make it about the future, not just the past. In the UAE and Bahrain, following the Abraham Accords, we've seen a sudden surge in interest in learning Hebrew. Why? Because there's business. There's tourism, there's tech collaboration. When language becomes a key to a better life, the traitor narrative starts to fade. In Israel, there's a push to make Arabic a mandatory subject in schools again, but not just know your enemy, Arabic cultural Arabic. Music, film, food. If you love the food and the music, you'll want to learn the words. Think about how many people learn Japanese because they loved anime or Korean because of K-pop.
It's the K-pop model of diplomacy. South Korea has done more for its global image through music and TV than through any embassy. If the Middle East had a Middle East pop where the lyrics blended all 3 languages, you'd have kids learning the vocab just to sing along. It sounds trivial, but that's how you change the vibe of a region. You make the other cool. You make their sound something you want to emulate rather than something you want to tune out.
It's actually not trivial at all. Pop culture is the soft power that paves the way for hard power changes. Look at the singer AWA, 3 Israeli sisters of Yemenite descent who sing in Yemeni Arabic. They're huge in the Arab world. People in countries that don't even recognize Israel are dancing to their music in clubs. That's a linguistic bridge that bypassed the politicians entirely. The politicians are still arguing about borders and sanctions while the kids are sharing Spotify playlists across forbidden frontiers. Music doesn't need a passport, and neither does a good melody in a foreign tongue.
So, what can people actually do? If I'm a listener in the US or Europe or even in the region and I'm hearing this, what's the takeaway? Is it just go download Duolingo and hope for peace? Because one person learning hello isn't going to stop a tank. How do we move from individual effort to systemic change?
The first step is understanding that suspicion gap we talked about. If you're engaging in dialogue, be aware that your fluency might actually be intimidating or suspicious. Lead with humility. Second, support the grassroots stuff. The Alliance for Middle East Peace, ALLMMEP, is a coalition of over 170 NGOs doing this work. They're pushing for an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace, modeled after the one that helped end the Troubles in Northern Ireland. A big part of that fund's mission is linguistic and cultural exchange. They understand that you can't just sign a treaty, you have to build a society that can sustain that treaty. You need a population that can actually talk to each other when the cameras are gone.
And maybe rethink the English as a neutral ground thing. I know we said it's a crutch, but maybe it's also a barrier that keeps us from truly connecting. If you really want to move the needle, try to learn 5 phrases in the other person's language. Even if you butcher the pronunciation, the effort of stepping out of your linguistic fortress is a massive signal of respect. It says, I care enough about you to try and speak your heart language. It's a gesture of peace that doesn't require a treaty.
It really is. It's about moving from knowing the enemy to knowing the neighbor. It sounds simple, but in that part of the world, it's a revolutionary act. It's about reclaiming the civilian nature of language. When a Hebrew speaker uses Arabic to ask about a neighbor's health, or an Arabic speaker uses Hebrew to discuss a shared environmental project, they are staging a small, quiet rebellion against the state of perpetual conflict. They are saying, the politicians don't own my voice.
So, Herman, let's get real. Do you think we'll ever see that trilingual Middle East? Or are we stuck in our linguistic silos forever? Are we just going to keep getting better at translating the same old insults into more sophisticated digital formats?
I think technology might actually be the bridge that gets us there faster than we think. Real-time translation is getting scarily good, but it still lacks the soul of human language. However, it can act as training wheels. I think as the regional economy shifts, as we see more things like the Abraham Accords creating trade links and shared challenges like climate change requiring regional water management, the economic incentive will eventually outweigh the security fear. When there's money to be made and futures to be built, people find a way to talk. And eventually, that talking becomes understanding. We might see a future where being trilingual is just a job requirement for the 21st century Middle East, not because of a peace treaty, but because of a shared reality.
Money talks, as they say. Hopefully, it starts talking in 3 different languages and saying something other than, I want your land. It's a vision of a region where the Tower of Babel isn't a curse of confusion, but a skyscraper of collaboration. This has been a deep dive, Herman. I feel like I need to go practice my Shukran and Toda, and maybe find a Farsi tutor so I can understand what's actually going on in the Tehran art scene.
It's a start, Corn. It's a start. Every word is a brick. You just have to decide if you're building a wall or a path. And honestly, even a small path is better than a tall wall.
All right, let's wrap this up. Huge thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning and making sure we don't wander too far into the linguistic weeds. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show's generation pipeline.
If you found this discussion interesting, or if you have your own weird prompt about linguistics, geopolitics, or how to say pass the hummus in 3 languages, we want to hear it. This has been My Weird Prompts. We love taking these abstract ideas and seeing how they hit the real world.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and all the ways to subscribe. We've got a whole archive of these deep dives if you're looking to kill some time on your commute. Or just search for us on Telegram to stay in the loop and join the conversation. We're always looking for the next topic that makes us go, huh, I never thought of it that way.
Until next time, keep questioning the barriers, whether they're made of concrete or just words.
And maybe learn a new word today. Just one, it adds up. See ya.
Bye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and